there were all kinds of imitations of The Fugitive on the air. And Leonard Goldenson sat down with me in the commissary one day. He'd come over to talk to Wasserman. And he said, Roy, he said, did you ever have any problems with The Fugitive when you told it to anybody? I said, why do you ask, Leonard? He said, because I had nothing but problems. He says, I'm telling you, my staff didn't like it. Tom Moore didn't like it. And he says, I even had calls from the American Legion asking me why I was doing a show of this kind. And he says, I almost took it off the schedule. And he says, now, when it went on the air, there were no complaints. There was nobody complained about The Fugitive. It was accepted as if it was the most ordinary, regular, everyday thing in the world. And he says, now everyone's imitating. How come you haven't imitated it? And I said, well, Leonard, I have. I've come up with a show called Run for Your Life, and I'm sorry, but it was offered to NBC. I apologize for that. He said, oh, don't worry about it. Anyway, he went to keep his meeting with Wasserman.
So did you conceive of Run for Your Life as not a ripoff, but as something in the same vein as...
Yeah, many people had said to me, why don't you do what everyone else is doing? Rip off your own show. But I wouldn't do it. Because first of all, I don't like to repeat myself. But then Jennings Lang called me into his office one day. Jennings was, I guess, right-hand man to Wasserman. And he says, Roy, I have an idea. I'll admit it, it's a ripoff on your show, The Fugitive. But it's different enough that you might be interested. A man is told that he only has 2 years to live. He's a very successful man. He's got money in the bank. But he's told he's only got 2 years to live. And he walks out of there, out of the doctor's office, and we stay in the doctor's office, and we find out somehow or other, I don't know how you'll do it, but we find out somehow or other that it's a mistake, that he's giving a report that belongs to somebody else, to this guy. Now, Joe Swirling was with me. So
this
I say,
producer Joe Swirling.
Yeah. Yes, Joe Swirling Jr. So Joe and I leave the office, and we can hardly wait to start laughing. And we laugh all the way back to my office about what a crazy idea this is. I mean, how can you make a serious movie out of a guy who thinks he's going to die only it's a mistake? I mean, he didn't go to and get a second opinion. And but when we got back to the office, I sat at my desk alone, and I picked up the phone. I said, Joe, come here. He came on in. I said, you know something? If it's not a mistake, it's a good idea. It was after 3 years, a guy named Paul Klein called me and said, Roy, he says, you're in the 3rd year of Run for Your Life. And he says, I think if we go a 4th year, it's going to show up in the ratings because you've been telling people that he's only got 2 years to live. And I said, oh, Paul, for God's sake, did you ever see little Annie Rooney? I mean, she didn't grow an inch in 30 years. He says, that's different. And I think he may have been right. He says, Roy, that's different. Audiences for television are very literal. They aren't literal for things like cartoon strips. But for television, they're literal. And he says, I don't think we're going to pick you up for a 4th year. Unless you come up with something like he found a cure or something. I said, I can't do that. The show is that he's going to die. He says, then we probably won't. I can't be sure now, but we probably won't pick you up. Well, they didn't. It ran 3 years. It was always successful. Nominated for an Emmy. Won an Emmy, I think, or 2.